What happens when a single spoonful of food holds the key to a forgotten past? For Julian Croft, a man who could buy the world but couldn't buy back a memory dinner at the city's most exclusive restaurant, was just another Tuesday. But one dish, a dish not even on the menu, stopped him cold. It tasted of a life he thought was lost forever. He demanded to know who was responsible, expecting a world-renowned chef to step forward. Instead, the answer would come from the last person anyone expected, a quiet, overlooked waitress. Her story wouldn't just change her life, it would unravel a secret that connected two different worlds in the most impossible way. Aurelia wasn't just a restaurant, it was a statement. Perched on the 80th floor of the gleaming new Atlas Tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the sprawling metropolis below. The light from 1,000 buildings glittered like a carpet of fallen stars. Inside the decor was a study in minimalist opulence tables, of dark, polished mahogany chairs upholstered in cream-colored leather, and a single dramatic crystal chandelier that dripped light like frozen tears. The clinking of silver on porcelain was a delicate symphony punctuated by the hushed, important murmurs of the city's elite. For Serafina Sarah Washington, it was just another shift. Another night of balancing impossibly heavy trays, of smiling until her cheeks ached, and of being looked through as if she were as transparent as the glass walls surrounding her. At 26, her life was a world away from the patrons she served. Her reality was a cramped third-floor apartment, a stack of overdue medical bills for her younger brother Marcus, and the constant gnawing anxiety that came with it. Sarah moved with an efficiency that bordered on invisibility. She refilled water glasses before they were empty, cleared plates with a whisper-quiet grace, and anticipated needs before they were spoken. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named David, called her reliable. The head chef, the insufferably arrogant Antoine Dubois, called her the wallpaper. Both were true. Sarah had learned to blend in, to make herself small, because in a place like Aurelia, drawing attention was a liability. But beneath the starched black uniform and the practiced neutral expression was a fire. It was a legacy passed down from her grandmother Elodie, a woman who could make magic with little more than a cast-iron skillet and whatever grew in her Louisiana garden. Sarah's hands, though now calloused from carrying trays, knew the feel of kneading dough, the precise art of a chiffonade, the patient rhythm of stirring a roux for hours until it reached the perfect shade of dark chocolate. Her grandmother's worn, handwritten recipe book, its pages softened with age and stained with history, was her most prized possession. It was a Bible of flavors, a history of her family, told in paprika, thyme, and bay leaves. Tonight, the tension in Aurelia was thicker than usual. The reason was seated at table 1, the most coveted spot with the most breathtaking view, Julian Croft. He wasn't just wealthy, he was a titan of industry, a man whose name was whispered with a mixture of awe and fear in boardrooms across the globe. His face, sharp and handsome, was etched with a permanent look of impatience, as if the world was constantly moving too slowly for him. He was dining with 2 associates, their conversation a low, serious rumble about mergers and acquisitions worth more than the entire restaurant. Sarah was assigned to their section. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A good tip from this table could mean making rent without having to dip into the emergency fund she kept for Marcus's medication. A complaint could mean losing her job. "Good evening, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice smooth and steady, betraying none of the nerves churning within her. "May I get you started with something to drink?" Julian Croft didn't even look at her. He gestured dismissively with a hand that wore a watch worth more than her car. "Sparkling water. 3 glasses. And tell Chef Dubois I'm not in the mood for his usual theatrics. I want something real, something with soul." See if he's capable of that." The insult was delivered with such casual cruelty that Sarah felt a flush of anger rise in her cheeks. Chef Antoine's theatrics were Michelin-starred plates of deconstructed foams, gels, and soils that looked more like science experiments than food. They were technically brilliant, but emotionally sterile. Sarah knew exactly what the man meant by soul, but knew Antoine was incapable of providing it. She nodded politely, her mask of professional calm firmly in place. "Of course, sir." As she retreated to the kitchen, the weight of the order felt heavier than any tray. She relayed the message to Chef Antoine, whose face contorted into a mask of pure indignation. "Soul!" he sneered, his French accent thickening with his anger. "This peasant of a billionaire wouldn't know soul if it was served to him on a gold platter. He wants soul fine. Give him the coq au vin. It's simple enough for his unrefined palate." The kitchen staff scurried to obey, but as the night wore on, a small disaster struck. A crucial imported ingredient for another VIP table's main course was discovered to be spoiled. The kitchen descended into a controlled panic. Chef Antoine was screaming, his face puce. In the chaos, Julian Croft's order was delayed. David, the manager, rushed into the kitchen, his face pale. "Table 1 is getting impatient. Mr. Croft is asking for his main course. What's the status? It will be ready when it is ready." Antoine snapped, distracted by the other crisis. It was in that moment of chaos that Sarah saw it. Tucked away in the back of the pantry, something she had brought in for the staff meal earlier that week, a container of her own meticulously prepared dark roux, the heart and soul of her grandmother's signature dish. And in the walk-in cooler she knew there was andouille sausage and shrimp left over from a special last month. All the components were there. An idea reckless and insane sparked in her mind. Mr. Croft wanted something with soul. She held the soul of generations in her memory. She could make him a dish that would sing with it. It was a wild gamble, a flagrant breach of every rule. But the thought of Marcus, of the bills piling up, and the stinging memory of Croft's casual dismissal and Antoine's pushed her over the edge. While the rest of the kitchen was a whirlwind of panicked energy, Sarah slipped into a quiet, forgotten corner station. With trembling hands, she pulled out a stock pot. She was no longer a waitress. She was Elodie's granddaughter, and she was about to cook from the heart. The corner of the kitchen where Sarah worked became a sanctuary amidst the storm. The clatter of pans, the hiss of the grill, and Chef Antoine's furious tirades faded into a dull roar. Here there was only the familiar, comforting ritual. Her movements were fluid and certain, a dance she had practiced 1,000 times in her own tiny kitchen, guided by the phantom presence of her grandmother. She started with the Trinity, the holy trio of Creole, cooking finely diced onion, celery, and bell pepper. They hit the hot oil in the stock pot with a sizzle that was music to her ears. She sautéed them until they were soft and translucent, their aroma rising to form the fragrant foundation of the dish. This was Grandmother Elodie's Jubilee Gumbo, a recipe that had never been written down in its entirety until Sarah transcribed it herself. It was called Jubilee because Elodie only made it for the most special occasions, births, homecomings, and times when the soul needed healing. Sarah's soul needed healing now. Every chop of the knife, every stir of the spoon was an act of defiance. She was reclaiming a piece of herself that Aurelia tried to strip away every day. She added the garlic minced to a paste, letting it cook for just a minute until its sharp scent bloomed. Then came the heart of the gumbo, the dark, smoky roux she had so carefully prepared at home. It melted into the hot oil, thickening the base and tinting it a deep, rich brown. She whisked in chicken stock slowly, at first ensuring there were no lumps. Then, with more confidence, until the mixture was a smooth, velvety canvas. This was where the magic happened. She reached for the spices, not measuring, but pouring them into her palm, by feel, by memory. A generous shake of Cajun, spice a dash of cayenne for a low humming heat-dried thyme, and 3 essential bay leaves. Then came the secret ingredients, the 2 touches that made this Elodie's recipe, and no one else's. A spoonful of filet powder made from ground sassafras, leaves to thicken and add its unique earthy flavor. And the final most important touch, a tiny pinch of freshly grated nutmeg, a secret her grandmother swore, woke everything up. She let the base simmer, allowing the flavors to meld and deepen into a complex harmony. Then she added the slices of rich, spicy andouille sausage and let them render their flavor into the gumbo. The whole kitchen was now beginning to fill with a scent that was utterly alien to Aurelia's usual sterile air of truffle oil and seared scallops. It was a smell that was warm, inviting, and deeply human. A few of the line cooks, drawn by the aroma, paused their frantic work to glance over. Their expressions were a mixture of confusion and intrigue. What was the waitress doing? Washington, what do you think you're doing? One of them. A young cook named Leo whispered, his eyes wide. If Antoine sees you. Cover for me, Sarah whispered back, her eyes never leaving the pot. Please. Leo hesitated for a second, then gave a curt nod and turned back to his station, creating a subtle screen with his body. The final step was the seafood. She added the plump pink shrimp at the very last minute, letting them poach gently in the simmering gumbo until they were perfectly tender. Any longer, and they would turn tough. It was a matter of timing and instinct. She ladled the finished Jubilee gumbo into a simple, rustic ceramic bowl, a stark contrast to Aurelia's pristine white porcelain. She topped it with a perfect mound of fluffy white rice and a sprinkle of fresh green scallions and parsley. It wasn't just a bowl of food. It was a story. It was the story of her ancestors of resilience and joy of making something beautiful out of humble ingredients. It was her grandmother's laughter and the warmth of her kitchen. It was everything that this cold, gilded restaurant was not. Her heart was pounding as she picked up the bowl. This was it. She bypassed the official expediting station, knowing Antoine would stop her. Catching the eye of a junior server, she said with an authority he'd never heard from her before, "Table 1. Now." The server, too intimidated to question her, nodded and carefully carried the bowl out of the kitchen. Sarah leaned against the cool, stainless steel counter, her apron suddenly feeling heavy, her legs weak. She had just committed an act of culinary treason. She had sent a piece of her soul out into the dining room to a man who had demanded it, never knowing who he was asking. Now all she could do was wait for the verdict. It would either be her salvation or her ruin. The dining room of Aurelia operated on a delicate, unspoken set of rules. Sound was managed, emotions were restrained, and decorum was paramount. The arrival of the gumbo at table 1 shattered that unspoken contract. First, it was the aroma. As the server placed the bowl before Julian Croft, a warm, complex scent, smoky savory with a hint of the sea wafted into the air. It was a stark contrast to the clean, almost clinical aromas of the other dishes. Heads at nearby tables turned, noses twitching with curiosity. Julian Croft looked down at the bowl with a frown. This was not the artful, pretentious plating he was accustomed to. It was simple, honest, almost rustic. It looked like something from a home kitchen, not a Michelin-starred establishment. His associates exchanged wary glances. Had the chef insulted him with this peasant food? "What is this?" Julian asked, his voice low and sharp. The young server, who had no idea, stammered, The chef's special, sir. For you. Julian picked up his spoon, a cynical curl on his lip. He was ready to dismiss it, to summon the manager and tear a strip off the chef for this insolence. He dipped the spoon into the dark, rich broth, collecting a piece of shrimp, a slice of sausage, and some rice. He lifted it to his lips, his expression one of bored disdain. And then everything changed. The moment the gumbo touched his tongue, his face went slack. The cynical sneer vanished, replaced by a look of profound, utter shock. His eyes, which were usually a cold, piercing grey, widened and seemed to look at something far beyond the restaurant walls. His hand, still holding the spoon, trembled slightly. His two associates stopped their conversation, watching him with concern. "Julian, is everything all right?" one of them asked. Julian didn't answer. He couldn't. He was no longer on the 80th floor of the Atlas Tower. He was a small boy, no older than 7, sitting in a warm, sunlit kitchen that smelled of baking bread and something savory simmering on the stove. A woman with kind eyes and a soft, gentle laugh was humming a tune he hadn't heard in 30 years. She was spooning something dark and wonderful from a big pot into his favorite blue bowl. It was the only clear memory he had of his mother before she was gone. The taste was identical. The smoky depth of the roux, the gentle heat of the cayenne, the earthy note of the filet. And something else. That tiny, almost imperceptible hint of nutmeg that woke everything up. It was a flavor profile he hadn't experienced in decades, a culinary ghost that had just materialized on his palate. He took another spoonful and then another. It wasn't just food, it was an excavation. Each bite unearthed a fossil of a long-buried memory. His mother's smile, the feel of her hand on his head, the sound of her voice calling his name. Emotions he had locked away for his entire adult life, grief, love, a deep and aching sense of loss welled up inside him, threatening to breach the formidable walls he had built around his heart. A single tear escaped his eye and traced a path down his chiseled cheek. He wiped it away angrily, embarrassed by the sudden, overwhelming show of emotion. The entire dining room seemed to be holding its breath. The silence at table 1 was a vacuum, drawing the attention of everyone around. Julian Croft, the ruthless predator of the financial world, was sitting perfectly still, his spoon hovering over a bowl of what looked like stew, with a look of stunned vulnerability on his face. He pushed the bowl away gently, his appetite gone, replaced by a desperate, urgent need. He looked up, and his gaze swept the room, finally landing on David the manager, who was already hurrying toward the table, his face a mask of anxiety. "Sir, is the dish not to your liking?" David asked, his voice trembling. Julian Croft looked David straight in the eye. The cold, commanding fire was back in his gaze, but now it was fueled by something different. Not arrogance, but a raw, desperate hope. His voice was quiet, but it carried across the hushed room with the force of a thunderclap. "Who made this?" Back in the kitchen, Sarah heard the echo of the question from a server rushing past. Her blood ran cold. The tone wasn't one of pleasure, it sounded like an accusation. She had been a fool, a reckless, stupid fool. She braced herself for the inevitable, for David to storm into the kitchen, for Chef Antoine to point a shaking, accusatory finger at her for the words, "You're fired," to seal her fate. She clutched the worn edge of the counter, waiting for the axe to fall. The question hung in the air, electric and dangerous. Who made this? Inside the kitchen, Chef Antoine Dubois heard it too. He saw the manager's panicked expression through the service window. He saw the stunned faces of the other diners. And he smelled an opportunity. The aroma of the gumbo, which had at first annoyed him, now smelled like success. A man like Julian Croft did not have that kind of reaction to something he disliked. That was the look of a man who had been deeply, profoundly moved. Pride and ambition, two of Antoine's most defining characteristics, surged through him. He smoothed down his pristine white chef's jacket, a predatory gleam in his eyes. This was his kitchen, his Michelin star. Any miracle that came out of it belonged to him. Before David could even formulate a response, Chef Antoine strode out of the kitchen, his posture radiating a false, theatrical humility. He moved through the dining room like a conquering hero, a confident smile plastered on his face. He arrived at table 1 and gave a slight deferential bow. "Mr. Croft." He began his accent, a finely tuned instrument of culinary authority. "I am Chef Antoine Dubois. I am so glad that my little experiment pleased you." Sarah, peering through the small circular window of the kitchen door, felt her stomach drop. Her breath caught in her throat. His experiment, Julian Croft's gaze, was intense, analytical. He looked at the impeccably dressed chef searching his face. "You made this?" he asked, his voice still low and freighted with meaning. "But of course," Antoine said with a flourish. "It is a dish I have been developing for some time, a modern interpretation of an old rustic classic. I call it Crépuscule de Louisiane, Louisiana Twilight." He was brilliant at improvising, at weaving a narrative of culinary genius on the spot. The roux it is aged for 48 hours in a humidity-controlled environment to deepen its complexity. The andouille is smoked in-house over pecan wood. It is a very delicate, technical process. He was painting a masterpiece of lies, using the jargon of haute cuisine to claim Sarah's heritage as his own. The line cooks, who had seen Sarah at her station, exchanged uneasy glances, but remained silent. No one dared to contradict the chef. Julian listened to every word, his expression unreadable. "Louisiana Twilight." He repeated softly the name, tasting foreign and wrong on his tongue. The explanation was technically impressive, full of the buzzwords he expected from a chef of this caliber. But it felt hollow. It didn't match the soul of what he had tasted. The dish hadn't spoken of humidity-controlled rooms and technical processes. It had spoken of warmth of hands, of history. "An old classic." Julian pressed his eyes, narrowing slightly. "From where exactly? What is its story?" Antoine's smile didn't falter. "It is my own homage to the Creole tradition. The story is one of innovation, of taking the humble and elevating it to the sublime. That is my philosophy, you see." In the kitchen, Sarah felt a rage so pure and hot it burned away her fear. He was stealing her grandmother's legacy. He was taking Elodie's Jubilee gumbo and repackaging it as his own pretentious creation. He had called her wallpaper, someone invisible, and now he was stealing from the one part of her that was truly vibrant. The injustice of it was a physical blow. She watched as Julian Croft nodded slowly, though a flicker of doubt remained in his eyes. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek black business card. He slid it across the table to Antoine. "I'm opening a new flagship hotel in New York," Julian said, his voice returning to its usual businesslike clip. "It will have a signature restaurant. I am looking for an executive chef, someone with vision, someone who can create food like this. We should talk." The offer hung in the air, worth millions. It was a career-defining opportunity. Antoine's eyes widened, his professional composure momentarily cracking to reveal the naked ambition beneath. He took the card with a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly. "I would be honored, Mr. Croft," he said, his voice thick with triumph. Sarah watched the exchange, her heart shattering into a million pieces. He wasn't just stealing her dish. He was building a future on it. Her future. the future she'd dreamed of, the one that could finally give Marcus the life and care he deserved. All her hard work, her legacy, her one reckless act of hope, it was all being handed to a fraud on a silver platter. The fear was gone. The quiet, invisible waitress was gone. All that remained was the fiery spirit of Elodie Washington's granddaughter. She pushed open the kitchen door and without a second thought began walking toward table 1. The wallpaper was about to speak. Every step Sarah took across the plush carpet of the Aurelia dining room felt like a mile. The hushed conversations, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a dull hum. Her entire focus was a laser beam fixed on table 1, on the smug, triumphant face of Chef Antoine and the powerful searching eyes of Julian Croft. David, the manager, saw her approaching, and his face went white with panic. He moved to intercept her, his hands held up in a placating gesture. "Sarah, what are you doing? Go back to the kitchen. Now." Sarah walked right past him, as if he were a ghost. Her gaze never wavered from Julian Croft. She stopped at the edge of the table, her hands clasped tightly behind her back to keep them from shaking. She was just a waitress in a simple black uniform, but she stood with the posture of a queen. The 3 men at the table looked up at her. Julian's associates looked annoyed by the interruption. Chef Antoine's face darkened with fury. Julian, however, simply looked at her, his expression one of intense, unwavering curiosity. He had seen the fire in her eyes as she approached. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the charged silence. "There seems to be a misunderstanding." Antoine stepped forward, placing himself between Sarah and Julian. "This is a staff matter, Mr. Croft. My apologies. She is just a waitress, clearly overwhelmed." He turned to Sarah, his voice a venomous whisper. "Get back to the kitchen before I have you thrown out." "A waitress who knows that you're lying," Sarah said, her voice rising slightly in volume and conviction. She looked past Antoine, directly at Julian. "He didn't make that dish, sir. I did." A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables. This was better than theatre. Antoine laughed a short, ugly bark. "This is absurd. She is delusional. The stress of the evening has clearly gotten to her." Julian Croft remained silent, his gaze shifting between the furious, indignant chef and the calm, resolute waitress. He was a man who had built an empire by reading people, by spotting a bluff, by sensing weakness and deception. He looked at Antoine's theatrical outrage, and then at Sarah's quiet, unshakable certainty. "Is that so?" Julian said, his voice dangerously soft. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. He wasn't addressing Antoine. He was speaking only to Sarah. "If you made it, then tell me about it. Tell me about your Louisiana Twilight." He used the chef's pretentious name with a faint, ironic twist. Sarah took a deep breath. "Its name isn't Louisiana Twilight. It's called Jubilee Gumbo. And it doesn't have a philosophy. It has a history." Antoine tried to interrupt. "This is preposterous. Let her speak," Julian commanded, his voice sharp as steel. Antoine fell silent, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and fear. "The roux isn't aged in a special room," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. "It's made in a cast-iron skillet, stirred with a wooden spoon for almost an hour, until it's the color of milk chocolate and smells like toasted pecans. You don't smoke the andouille over pecan wood. You use a specific brand from a small supplier in St. Martin Parish because it has the right balance of smoke and spice. And the real depth of flavor doesn't come from any modern technique. It comes from the Trinity, a little bit of filet powder, and 3 whole bay leaves that you have to remember to take out before you serve it." She was reciting the steps not as a recipe, but as a sacred text. Each detail was a brush stroke, painting a picture of authenticity that Antoine's lies couldn't match. Julian's face was a mask of concentration. He was hanging on her every word. Sarah then looked him directly in the eye, her voice dropping to a more personal, intimate level. "And there's one last thing. A secret. Something only the person who made it would know. A tiny pinch of a spice that doesn't belong in traditional gumbo, but my grandmother swore by it. She said it was the key. She said it woke everything up." Julian Croft's carefully constructed composure finally cracked. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table, the color draining from his face. The air crackled with tension. He knew. He knew what she was going to say. "What spice?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Antoine looked back and forth between them, a dawning horror on his face. This was no longer about a job offer. This was a tribunal, and he was the one on trial. He had no idea what she was talking about. He had no answer. Sarah held Julian's gaze. "Nutmeg," she said softly. "A fresh grated pinch of nutmeg." The words struck Julian Croft like a physical blow. He slumped back in his chair, his mind reeling. It was true. He remembered his mother at her spice rack, grating a tiny hard nut, telling him with a conspiratorial wink, "This is our little secret, Julian. It wakes everything up." It was a detail so small, so specific, so deeply buried in his memory, that hearing it spoken aloud felt like a supernatural event. He knew with absolute certainty that the man standing before him was a liar and the waitress. The waitress was the keeper of a truth he thought he had lost forever. He turned his icy gaze on the now sweating Chef Antoine. The game was over. The silence that followed Sarah's revelation was absolute. It was as if all the air had been sucked out of the 80th floor dining room. Chef Antoine Dubois stood frozen, his face a ghastly shade of pale. The intricate web of lies he had spun so effortlessly had just been incinerated by a single word, nutmeg. Julian Croft slowly lifted his gaze from the table and fixed it on Antoine. There was no anger in his eyes, no theatrical rage. There was something far more terrifying, a cold, quiet finality. It was the look he gave a rival company just before a hostile takeover. It was the look of utter demolition. "Get out," Julian said. The words were not loud, but they carried the weight of a death sentence. "Mr. Croft, I can explain." Antoine stammered, his bravado crumbling into dust. "There was a miscommunication in the kitchen." "I don't recall asking for an explanation," Julian said, his voice dropping even lower. "I recall telling you to get out. Leave this restaurant. I will be speaking with the owners in the morning. I suggest you find a new profession. I hear accounting is stable." He then turned his head slightly. David, the manager who had been hovering nearby, looking as if he was about to faint, scurried over. "Yes, Mr. Croft. This man's employment here is terminated effective immediately. See him out." David nodded vigorously, grabbing Antoine's arm. The disgraced chef stripped of his pride, and his future allowed himself to be led away without another word, his white jacket suddenly looking like a shroud. The dining room began to buzz with hushed, frantic whispers. Julian's associates looked on, stunned into silence by the raw, personal drama unfolding before them. Julian paid them no mind. He had forgotten they were even there. His entire world had shrunk to the space occupied by the waitress standing before him. He turned his full attention to Sarah. His expression was no longer cold or intimidating. It was raw, vulnerable, and filled with a desperate, aching question. "How?" he asked, his voice raspy with emotion. "How could you possibly know that I—" Sarah's own anger had subsided, replaced by a deep-seated sense of vindication. I told you, she said softly. It wasn't my secret. It was my grandmother's. Your grandmother. Julian repeated the words, feeling foreign and momentous. She taught you to cook. She taught me everything. Sarah said, a sad smile touching her lips. She raised me in her kitchen in the Tremaine neighborhood of New Orleans. Every dish she made had a story. The Jubilee gumbo was her masterpiece. It was the first thing she taught me, and the last thing I ever cooked with her before she passed. The mention of New Orleans sent another jolt through Julian. It was all connecting puzzle pieces from two different worlds flying together to form a picture he was terrified to look at. Her name, Julian said, his voice tight. Tell me your grandmother's name. It felt strange to say it aloud in this sterile, opulent room. Her name was a sacred thing belonging to the world of screened-in porches, the scent of magnolia, and the low hum of cicadas. Her name was Elodie. Sarah said, her voice filled with love and reverence. Elodie Washington. The name struck Julian Croft with the force of a physical impact. He visibly recoiled as if he'd been struck. Elodie Washington. It wasn't just a name. It was a key unlocking the last rusted door in the furthest corner of his memory. He remembered his mother talking about her time in New Orleans, a brief bohemian summer she spent there before she met his father, and was swept into a world of wealth and expectation. She always spoke of that time with a unique fondness, a nostalgia for a life she didn't get to live. And she always spoke of one person. My mother, Julian began, his voice cracking. He had to stop to compose himself, a battle raging within him. Before she married my father, she spent a summer volunteering at a community center in New Orleans. She wasn't a good cook. She always burned everything. A faint, sad smile ghosted across his lips. But she always told me about a woman she met there. A kind, brilliant cook who ran the center's kitchen. A woman who took pity on her and taught her how to make one single perfect dish. A dish my mother would make for me on my birthday every year until she was gone. Sarah stared at him, her heart pounding in her chest, a wild, impossible idea beginning to form in her mind. She could barely breathe. Julian looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears, the truth laid bare for both of them to see. Her best friend that summer. He said, his voice thick with 30 years of buried grief. The woman who taught her that recipe. Her name was Elodie Washington. The revelation settled over the table, so profound and so impossibly intimate that it created its own pocket of silence in the bustling restaurant. The world outside the bubble of Table 1 ceased to exist. There was only a billionaire haunted by his past, and a waitress who was the living embodiment of it. Sarah felt her knees go weak. She reached out and steadied herself on the back of an empty chair. Her grandmother had mentioned a friend from long ago, a sweet but clumsy young woman from up north named Eleanor, who had a laugh like wind chimes and a fierce desire to learn how to cook at least one thing to impress her family. Elodie had taught her the Jubilee gumbo, a dish she shared with only a chosen few. Could it be your mother? Sarah whispered the name, catching in her throat. Was her name Eleanor? Julian nodded, a look of pure astonishment on his face. Eleanor Croft. Before she was married, it was Eleanor Vance. It was true. The scattered, half-forgotten stories from two different families, two different worlds had just converged in a way that defied all logic. Sarah's grandmother, the humble but brilliant cook from New Orleans, and Julian Croft's mother, the soon-to-be society wife, had shared a friendship, a kitchen, and a secret recipe. That recipe had become a lifeline of memory for a grieving son, and a legacy of love for a devoted granddaughter. The dish was not just a meal. It was a bridge spanning decades of loss and circumstance, connecting them in that very moment. My grandmother spoke of her. Sarah said, her own eyes now misty. She said Eleanor was the only person she ever knew who could burn water, but that she had the kindest heart she'd ever met. She sent my grandmother a postcard every year for her birthday, even after she became Mrs. Croft. Sarah remembered those postcards. They were always of elegant, far-flung places, Paris, Rome, Tokyo. To a little girl in New Orleans, they had seemed like messages from another planet. And they had always been signed, "With love, your friend Eleanor." Julian ran a hand over his face, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. "My mother passed away when I was 10, he said, his voice low and heavy. After that, my father. He wasn't a sentimental man. He packed away all of her things, her letters, her photos. He wanted to move on. I think he thought he was protecting me, but he was erasing her. That taste, that was the only thing I had left of her. The only thing he couldn't take away. I've spent years trying to find it. I've hired the best chefs in the world to try and replicate it from my descriptions. No one ever came close." He looked at Sarah, and for the first time, she didn't see a billionaire. She saw that 7-year-old boy in the sunlit kitchen, a boy who had lost his mother and the flavor of his childhood all at once. They couldn't replicate it, Sarah said softly, because they were missing the most important ingredient. "The nutmeg?" Julian asked. Sarah shook her head. "The story. They were just following instructions. You have to cook it with love. That's what my grandmother always said. It's the only way to make it jubilee." The raw emotion of the moment was overwhelming. Julian's 2 associates, realizing they were intruding on something sacred, quietly excused themselves, leaving Sarah and Julian alone at the table. Julian gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please," he said. "Sit." It was the first time an employer had ever asked her to sit down during service. She sank into the soft leather chair, her apron feeling completely out of place in the opulent setting. All this time, Julian mused, looking out at the city lights, but seeing something else entirely. All my life I've been chasing success, building an empire, thinking that was what mattered. I thought that dish was just about a flavor, a memory, but it's more than that. It's a connection. It's a legacy. He turned his intense gaze back to her. The ruthless CEO was gone, replaced by a man humbled by a truth he never expected to find. "Your grandmother gave my mother a gift that she passed on to me. And you just gave it back. You have no idea what you've done for me tonight." Sarah could only nod, tears now freely tracing paths down her cheeks. She was the most amazing person I ever knew. I've just been trying to do right by her, to keep her memory alive. "You've done more than that," Julian said, a new energy entering his voice. The fog of grief was beginning to clear, replaced by the clarity and decisiveness that had made him a titan. An idea was forming an opportunity, born not of profit and loss, but of destiny and legacy. "This is not how your story or your grandmother's story should be told," he said, leaning forward, his eyes alight with purpose. "Hiding in the kitchen of a place like this? That's not right. A gift like yours, a legacy like Elodie Washington's, it deserves a cathedral." The morning after the life-altering night at Aurelia felt surreal. Sarah woke up in her small apartment to the familiar sounds of city traffic, but the oppressive weight of anxiety that usually greeted her was gone, replaced by a strange, buzzing lightness. She was expecting a call from David, the manager, to fire her. Instead, the call came from a smooth-voiced woman who introduced herself as Julian Croft's executive assistant. She informed Sarah that Mr. Croft had arranged for a private car to pick her up in 1 hour. He had the assistant explained a business proposition to discuss. Before she could process this, another call came. It was David. His voice was laced with a panicked respect she had never heard from him before. "Sarah, please don't hang up. I just wanted to say I am so sorry about last night. What Chef Antoine did was unforgivable. Mr. Croft's lawyers have been in touch. Your employment has been terminated. But Mr. Croft insisted on a severance package. It's equivalent to a full year's salary." He paused, then added, "And Leo the line cook. He told them how you cooked the dish and how he covered for you. Mr. Croft has ensured he's been taken care of as well." Sarah was speechless. A year's salary. It was a safety net so vast she could hardly comprehend it. It meant Marcus's bills were covered. It meant they could breathe. "Thank you, David." She managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. Loyalty rewarded. It was a beautiful concept. An hour later, Sarah found herself stepping out of a sleek black town car and into the lobby of Croft Enterprises, a skyscraper of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. She was escorted to the penthouse floor where Julian Croft's office occupied the entire corner. It was a minimalist space, dominated by a massive oak desk and a panoramic view of the city that made the one from Aurelia look like a postcard. Julian wasn't behind his desk. He was standing by the window looking out, dressed not in a suit, but in a simple grey cashmere sweater. He turned as she entered, and his smile was genuine, stripped of the arrogance she'd first seen. "Serafina," he said, using her full name with a soft respect. "Thank you for coming." He gestured to 2 comfortable chairs near the window. "I have not been able to stop thinking about last night, about your grandmother and mine. It feels like destiny. I don't know what to call it," Sarah admitted, sitting down, feeling small in the vast, powerful room. "It's a lot to take in." "I want to make you an offer," he said, getting straight to the point, his CEO instincts still sharp. "And I want to be very clear. This is not charity. This is not a gift. I consider what you have to be a rare and immensely valuable asset. Your talent, your grandmother's legacy, it's priceless. I want to be your partner. I want to build a restaurant with you, for you, a place that honors Elodie Washington." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "A partner. A full partner, he confirmed. "I will provide the capital, the real estate, the business infrastructure. You will provide the soul. You will have complete creative control. The menu, the design, the staff, the name, everything. We will build a temple to the kind of food that changed both our lives." He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Tell me, Serafina, what do you see when you close your eyes and imagine the perfect place to tell your grandmother's story? What does it look like?" And so she told him. In that sterile billion-dollar office, she painted a picture of a place with warm brick walls, the sound of jazz, the smell of toasted spices, and a kitchen that was open and full of life, not hidden away in the back. A place where every guest felt like they were coming home. He listened to every word, and when she was done, he simply said, "Let's go build it." The first thing Sarah did, with the generous advance Julian wired to her account, was secure a consultation at the city's most prestigious neurological clinic for Marcus. She sat with her brother in the plush waiting room, holding his hand. When they were called in to meet the renowned Dr. Evan, Sarah explained his entire medical history with a newfound confidence. The doctor listened patiently, then laid out a groundbreaking new treatment plan. For the first time, there was a clear, tangible path, not just to stability, but to recovery. Leaving the clinic, Marcus stopped on the sidewalk and pulled his sister into a fierce hug, tears of relief streaming down his face. The shadow they had lived under for so long was finally receding. The next few months were a blur of joyful creative chaos. Julian secured the perfect building in the historic district, and they began the transformation. Sarah pored over her grandmother's recipe book, not just selecting dishes, but curating a narrative. Each item on the menu for Elodie's came with a short story, a memory of its origin. She insisted on hiring her own staff. Her first hire was Leo, the young line cook from Aurelia, whom she made her sous chef. She interviewed dozens of others, asking them not about their technique, but about the first meal they ever loved. She assembled a team who understood that cooking was an act of love. Julian, meanwhile, was undergoing his own transformation. One afternoon, Sarah found him in the half-finished restaurant, awkwardly holding one of her grandmother's heavy cast-iron skillets. "She cooked in this?" he asked in awe. "Every single day," Sarah smiled. "Want a lesson?" She spent the next hour teaching him the patient, meditative process of making a perfect roux. He was clumsy and splattered flour on his expensive trousers, but he was also completely absorbed, a look of peaceful concentration on his face she'd never seen before. In that moment, sharing a laugh over a cloud of flour, they were not a billionaire and a chef. They were just two people honoring a shared past. Opening night at Elodie's was everything they had dreamed of and more. The room was alive, a vibrant tapestry of people from every walk of life. A jazz trio played softly in the corner. Marcus, looking healthier and happier than he had in years, stood proudly at the host stand, his smile a beacon of warmth. Sarah, in a crisp white chef's coat, with Elodie's embroidered over her heart, moved through the room. She wasn't hiding in the kitchen. She was sharing her story. She stopped at a table where a notorious food critic, a man known for his harsh reviews, was taking a bite of the Jubilee gumbo. She saw his eyes close for a moment, his professional facade melting away into one of pure, unadulterated pleasure. He looked up at her and simply nodded, a universe of approval in the gesture. Late in the evening, she found Julian standing by the bar, watching the scene with a quiet, satisfied smile. He was holding a small bowl of her gumbo. "She would have loved this," he said, his voice husky. "My mother. She always wanted a place that felt like this, full of life. Elodie would have been so proud of you." "I think," Sarah said, looking at the joyful room at her healthy brother, at the incredible new life that had bloomed from a single act of defiance. "They both are." It wasn't just a restaurant. It was a testament to the fact that our real legacy is not the money we make, but the love we share and the memories we nourish. The wallpaper had not only found her voice, she had built a beautiful, thriving home for it, a jubilee for all to share. Serafina's story is a powerful reminder that our true value is never defined by our job title or our circumstances. The world may have seen her as just a waitress, but she carried within her a legacy of love, talent, and history that was richer than any fortune. It took one man not just looking for a meal, but searching for a memory to finally see her. Their story shows us that food is never just food, it's memory, it's connection, and sometimes it's destiny on a plate. It teaches us to never underestimate the quiet ones, because they are often the ones with the most powerful stories to tell. What did you think of Sarah's incredible journey? Do you believe that a single moment can change a life forever? Let us know in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs a dose of inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more unforgettable stories. Thank you for watching.